Hey, I'm back. So let's catch up a bit and just do the end of the year video for last year. Considering the state of the world right now, I think pretending the past few months haven't happened is something that nobody's going to have an issue with, right? Alright. So anyway, 2019 was an especially rough year for me. Enough so that I put videos on hold before the end of it. Though for all of the problems that I've had with the year, it was a very good year in terms of things to escape into. It's been easier than ever for me to step outside of what's popular and just get into what's interesting for me personally. Some of that's reflected on the channel when I covered games like the Deception series or Baroque, which both placed me well outside of my comfort zone in terms of things that I usually play and had me take my time to find out how to engage with it, let alone cover those games. But there's so much more to the year, and even though it's several months late, I'd still like to take the time to go over some things that I've enjoyed in 2019 that it didn't give its own video. I know that I'm not alone in this, but the past year I fell for the recent rise of boomer shooters. Partially thanks to Dusk, and partially thanks to discovering Civi's YouTube videos, but the biggest reason for it was because I ended up buying a copy of Masters of Doom at the start of the year. It's a well-written and researched book about the history of id Software and the development and impact of Doom and the studio behind it, written in a style that you'd usually see from biographies of famous musicians or actors. So of course, after gaining some newfound respect for Doom, I decided to give Doom another spin, playing through the original Doom episodes, Doom 2, and even using a map generator and playing Doom Morale Arsenal, a mod that turns Doom into a roguelike with character classes and random enemy and weapon spawns, which works a lot better than you'd expect. The appeal of Doom has become even more interesting to me after having spent more time with it. A lot of the fun of exploring levels isn't too far off from a good dungeon crawling RPG like Etrian Odyssey. And I guess that kind of makes sense, knowing that both Romero and Carmack had a history with PC RPGs, dungeon crawlers, as well as drawing tons of inspiration from the Dungeons & Dragons campaigns that they've played together. Though, the boomer shooter spree didn't end there either. I finally also went through the Duke Nukem 3D episodes on PC, having most of my original experience with the Nintendo 64 release. Yeah, really. I played Blood, which I didn't like as much as I expected, and of course I played Dusk. I'll probably play more shooters in the future because I really want to explore more of the Doom modding scene, though that feels like it'll be a lifelong pursuit just with how much there already is out there, and how new things are still being made to this day. Not that I'm complaining. Diving back every now and again for years to come and still finding new experiences along the way actually excites me about this. It's a good time to be had. I play and beat these games at least once a year. Spelunky is a game that matters a lot to me. Ever since the freeware game got me through a lot of rough times, and the roguelite aspect is something that has allowed me to play it as much as I want without ever getting bored of it. The lack of permanent upgrades and unlockables is a really big factor in this, since there's never a progression to grind for or things to unlock again when coming back from a long hiatus. An especially good roguelite feels like one credit clearing an arcade game. And there aren't many roguelites that really give me that feeling the way that Spelunky embodies it. Every run, you always have everything that you need, and it's up to you to make something out of it. I even decided to stream it for a few hours until I beat it, expecting stream tax to really kick in as the distraction from chat would likely lead to a lot more untimely deaths. But at this point, the game is apparently so ingrained that I beat it on my first try, making that stream a lot shorter than I planned. I also bought that book about Spelunky's development from Boss Fight Books. It's written by Derek Yu himself, and it goes over his inspirations, design philosophies, and struggles in making the game, both for the freeware and the Xbox Live release. If you like Spelunky, you should absolutely read it. One thing that stood out to me is that a lot of the advice given to him by Microsoft to appeal to a wider audience was permanent progression and experience point systems to give you passive skills, allowing you to clear the game by grinding to victory. I wonder how many of the games that ended up implementing features like this did it because of outside interference from publishers with advice like this. Because it's an angle that kind of lessens most games that it appears in. Because you're going through a run-to-run grind to get the stats and equipment you need to beat the game instead of just knowing that you can beat the game. I'm really glad that Spelunky ended up without any of these things meddling with the base game balance, because even if a game could be beaten without it, having that pull that you could overcome it with grind rather than skill lessens the satisfaction of clearing it in pretty much every case that this sort of stuff is in. What is there to even say about Gitaroo Man? A lot of modern rhythm games owe a big debt to it. The song list is great. Sandbone Trio is a fuck. The game takes maybe an hour or so to beat, and spending that time with music this good is always a treat. Also, if you intend to emulate this game, get the PSP version. It emulates better on PSP than it does on PlayStation 2. And if you do, get the Japanese version instead, because they messed up with the vocals on stage 2, Flying to Your Heart. In the Western release, it removes a lot of the impact of the final sequence, and it's not like this is a text or story heavy game. You play as a kid who was given a guitar by his dog and have to engage in musical duels covering a wide variety of genres through time and space. Okay, only space. What is special with Gitaroo Man though, is that just like older rhythm games like Parappa the Rapper or Jammer Lammy, all these songs were made for the game itself. Unlike the previous two games though, the songs all have a long number of different segments that are shuffled around and happen at random until you've performed well enough to finish the song. Or lose. Meaning that the songs don't play entirely the same way every time. It's a shame that the people behind this dropped out of the rhythm game scene for real after Os Tatakai o Endan on the Nintendo DS. Apparently the world just wasn't ready for them yet. Resident Evil 2 Remake. Since pretty much the day of its original release, Resident Evil 4 has been my favorite Resident Evil game. The only downside to its existence has always been that the game helped kill the Resident Evil series as a survival horror series. Even though that's not even really its own fault, Resident Evil 4 itself still pushed you to fear the hordes of enemies, scavenge your ammo, and generally deal with the unknown on your first run, because by this time, zombies were absolutely known, and moving away from them meant moving in a new format, which would lead to new surprises. Resident Evil 4 would indirectly lead to the rise of third-person shooters, and it would bring Resident Evil to a path of co-op action shooters. Also, this brought us Revelations and Revelations 2, which are massively overlooked by most people and absolutely worth playing through for their own merits. And then Resident Evil 7 brought it back to survival horror in first person. What I found especially nice with the Resident Evil 2 remake was that it went back to third person while staying true to the horror feel of the original. The old idea that third person killed horror in Resident Evil could finally be put to rest, as the remake could absolutely stand side by side with the original. Not only that, but for me, it is now my favorite Resident Evil game, dethroning Leon's game with, well, Leon's game. God, I love Devil May Cry 5. I honestly don't have anything to say that has not been said a million times by everyone else. I just love this game a lot, and I wanted it to have a spot in this video even though I have nothing to say. This version of Nero is easily my favorite character action character to play as. And that's saying a lot. So, let's go beyond video games. Dungeon Meshi is a cooking manga about a group of adventurers in a dungeon that, lacking supplies because of a previously failed expedition left them without any money to stock up, decide to survive in a dungeon by eating the monsters that they kill. Their end goal being to face the dragon that ate one of their party members deep down into the dungeon. The English name for the manga is Delicious in Dungeon, and I wasn't the biggest fan of it until I realized that the initials for it are D&D. The setting is very clearly tabletop inspired, and it intends to explore that setting and its characters very well. Plus, the cover art for the first volume is clearly based on the first Dungeons & Dragons rulebook, which is really cool when you see it side by side. This is the manga that drew me back into reading manga a lot again, because it's just an exceptional work all around. It certainly helps that the cast is older and for the most part more mature than your typical heroes in a story like this. The group dynamic is really strong to a point that even the elf is likable, and in fact, Marcel is my favorite character of the bunch. There's a lot more that I want to say, but I really shouldn't. It goes places that you wouldn't expect without ever losing sight of what it was early on. And if it sounds interesting at all, please read it, because I recommend this very highly. Witch Hat Atelier is for the most part a really comfy manga to read with gorgeous art and paneling. Hell, it has some of the most inspired paneling that I've seen in a very long time. I say it's comfy for the most part because while it is a stunningly gorgeous manga that presents a magical ride, it's also clearly a story about the moral conundrum of responsibility and whether or not keeping power out of the hands of common people through secrecy is justifiable when it creates major inequality. It does so in a very sharp and harsh way without ever losing sight of that initial spark of wonder that was there, which is a very thin line that it walks, but it does so with grace. When Kengan Ashura ended, I absolutely did not want a sequel to it. It ended perfectly, and I was afraid that a sequel would just water down the experience by repeating the motions again, while taking away that solid ending that we had. Thankfully, I was very wrong about this. Kengan Omega has been a roller coaster of an experience so far. My biggest fear was that they'd played too safe, and if anything, they did anything but that. Breaking off traditions and rules and writing it dangerously close to pissing people off quite frequently. I could not be happier with this. If you are like me, and you held off on Kengan Omega initially because you were afraid that it'd be more of the same, lessening that feeling of originality that Kengan Ashura had, you should definitely pick this up sometime. I highly recommend Omega. And if you were holding off on Kengan Ashura until it ended and you didn't get the memo that it did, go read it right now. It is very good. So, with this late recap out of the way, I'm going to be focusing on new videos again, so please look forward to it. There's a lot more that I could talk about, like the incredible New Japan Pro Wrestling G1 Climax 2019, Kingdom Hearts 3, Risk of Rain 2, Babylon 5, Mob Psycho 100 Season 2, Slayers, Urusei Yatsura, Halo, and so many other things. But I wanted to get this video out of the way to warm up because the next video is sooner than you'd think. Anyway, this was AboveUp and I will see ya.